Is there anyone here who can understand what I'm trying to say? The question was quiet, almost swallowed by the soft piano drifting through the dining room, but it carried farther than anyone expected. Conversation slowed. Crystal glasses caught the warm amber light. The scent of grilled wagyu, fresh rosemary, and baked sourdough floated through one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, a place where reservations were measured in months instead of days, and where billion-dollar conversations were as common as dessert menus. At the center of the room sat Ethan Brooks, a Japanese billionaire CEO whose reputation stretched from Tokyo to Silicon Valley. His tailored navy suit fit perfectly, his silver watch reflected the chandelier above, and every person who recognized him assumed a man with that much influence could solve any problem placed before him. Tonight, for the first time in years, they were wrong. Ethan held the leather-bound menu with both hands, reading every line carefully before quietly shaking his head. He understood enough English to negotiate mergers, address shareholders, and speak at international conferences, but restaurant menus filled with regional expressions, unfamiliar culinary descriptions, and casual questions were different. Every sentence seemed to move just beyond his reach. The young waiter standing beside the table tried to help, speaking faster each time Ethan apologized. Another employee stepped over with a smile that slowly faded into uncertainty. Within minutes, 2 servers and a floor manager surrounded the table, each offering different explanations, each accidentally making the confusion worse. Nearby diners glanced over with polite curiosity. Some whispered. Others returned to their meals, assuming the restaurant would eventually sort everything out. Ethan remained calm, but inside he felt something he rarely experienced anymore. Helplessness. Success had taught him how to lead companies, navigate markets, and recover from failure. Yet none of those skills could translate a menu into something familiar enough to make him feel at ease. He lowered the menu and offered another apologetic smile, the kind worn by someone trying very hard not to inconvenience anyone else. Across the dining room, Naomi Carter noticed everything. She had worked evening shifts at Ashford House for almost 3 years, and experience had taught her that people often revealed their true character during moments of discomfort. Some became impatient. Others became demanding. A few blamed everyone around them. This man did none of those things. Instead, he thanked every employee who tried to help, bowed his head slightly after each misunderstanding, and patiently listened even when the explanations only made things more confusing. Naomi paused beside a service station, balancing a polished tray against one hip while quietly observing the scene. Most guests saw expensive suits before they noticed expressions. Naomi had learned to do the opposite. She saw the uncertainty in his eyes before she noticed the luxury watch on his wrist. She recognized the careful pauses between his words. More importantly, she recognized the silence growing around him. It was the kind of silence that made people feel alone inside a crowded room. The restaurant manager stepped closer with an embarrassed smile, suggesting another server might be able to assist, but the uncertainty remained. Ethan looked once more at the menu, then slowly folded it closed. For just a brief moment, the most powerful man in the room looked less like a billionaire and more like a traveler hoping someone would simply understand him. Naomi inhaled quietly. Company policy encouraged staff to stay within assigned sections. Approaching another server's table without permission usually earned a warning. But some moments asked for more than policy. They asked for kindness. She adjusted the name tag on her black uniform, steadied her breathing, and took one calm step toward the table, unaware that the smallest decision of her shift was about to change far more than one difficult dinner. Naomi slowed her pace just enough to think before she acted. Years of working in fine dining had taught her that timing mattered almost as much as kindness. She could have waited for the manager to solve the situation. She could have stayed inside the invisible boundaries assigned to her section. Instead, she chose something much simpler. She chose to see another human being before she saw a distinguished guest. With steady confidence, she approached the table and stopped a respectful distance away. The manager glanced toward her, surprised, but before anyone could object, Naomi gently bowed her head and spoke in clear, natural Japanese. "Good evening, sir. My name is Naomi. If you would like, I would be honored to help you." The words floated through the quiet dining room like a familiar melody carried across an ocean. Ethan looked up almost instantly. For the first time that evening, the uncertainty disappeared from his expression. His eyes widened, then softened into genuine relief. He answered in Japanese without hesitation, thanking her more than once for speaking his language. The change was immediate. His shoulders relaxed. His breathing slowed. Even the polite smile he had worn all evening transformed into something real. Around them, the restaurant seemed to pause without realizing it. The servers exchanged confused glances. The manager lowered the reservation tablet in his hands. A nearby couple stopped discussing business long enough to notice that the conversation at the center table had suddenly become effortless. Naomi listened carefully as Ethan explained that he had spent the previous week attending non-stop meetings across the United States. Normally, an assistant or interpreter traveled with him, but a sudden family emergency had required his interpreter to return to Japan that very morning. Ethan had insisted on keeping his dinner reservation anyway, because canceling would have disappointed a longtime business partner who was running late because of unexpected traffic. He admitted with a quiet laugh that reading contracts in English was far easier than understanding a menu filled with local expressions, seasonal ingredients, and unfamiliar cooking styles. Naomi smiled warmly. She explained each dish with patience, translating not only the words, but also the experience behind them. She described the rich flavor of dry-aged ribeye, the delicate balance of cedar-roasted salmon, the sweetness of roasted heirloom carrots, and the restaurant's signature mushroom risotto prepared with imported black truffles. Instead of translating literally, she explained the feeling each meal was meant to create, the traditions behind certain ingredients, and why the chef recommended specific combinations. Ethan listened with complete attention, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that revealed genuine curiosity rather than embarrassment. Within minutes, what had begun as an uncomfortable misunderstanding became an engaging conversation about food, travel, and cultural traditions. Naomi recommended a green tea-infused dessert because it reminded her of flavors she had once studied while learning Japanese cuisine from an elderly chef who believed every meal should tell a story before the first bite. Ethan smiled again, this time with visible appreciation. "You explain food the way people describe home," he said quietly in Japanese. Naomi felt her cheeks warm slightly, but remained composed. "Food has always been more than something to eat," she replied. "Sometimes it is the fastest way to tell someone they belong." Ethan nodded slowly, repeating her words almost to himself. Across the room, several guests had returned to their conversations, assuming the difficulty had simply passed. They did not realize they had just witnessed something far more meaningful than successful customer service. They had witnessed a stranger replacing discomfort with dignity through nothing more than respect, patience, and the willingness to speak a language that made another person feel seen. As Naomi finalized the order and thanked Ethan once more, neither of them realized that someone seated quietly near the window had been observing the entire exchange from the very beginning with growing interest. The dinner unfolded with a quiet elegance that gradually erased every trace of the awkward beginning. Plates arrived one by one, each presented with careful precision, and Ethan accepted every recommendation Naomi had offered with growing confidence. He no longer hesitated before speaking. Instead, he asked questions that revealed an appreciation extending far beyond the food itself. He wanted to know why certain ingredients were paired together, why one dish was served on stone while another arrived on porcelain, and how American chefs balance tradition with creativity. Naomi answered each question with calm enthusiasm, drawing from years of reading cookbooks borrowed from the public library, conversations with visiting chefs, and countless evenings spent learning after her shifts had ended. She never exaggerated what she knew, yet every explanation carried the quiet confidence of someone who had earned knowledge through curiosity rather than privilege. Ethan noticed that immediately. Many people spoke to impress. Naomi spoke to help. There was a difference, and it was impossible to miss. As the meal continued, another guest finally entered the restaurant. Dressed in a charcoal suit with a simple blue tie, the man apologized for arriving late before shaking Ethan's hand with genuine warmth. His name was Daniel Whitmore, a longtime American business partner who had worked beside Ethan on international technology projects for more than a decade. Daniel expected to find his friend frustrated after waiting alone, yet instead he found Ethan smiling as though he had just reunited with someone he had known for years. Ethan introduced Naomi in Japanese first, then repeated the introduction in English so everyone at the table could understand. Daniel raised his eyebrows with pleasant surprise. He admitted that he had never heard anyone in the restaurant speak Japanese so naturally. Naomi answered modestly, explaining that language had always fascinated her because every culture carried its own way of expressing kindness. Daniel smiled before saying that people often underestimated how powerful that ability could become. As Naomi excused herself to allow the two executives privacy, she returned to her section believing the evening had simply become another memorable shift. She did not notice Ethan watching her for a brief moment before turning back to his guest. Daniel leaned forward and quietly asked what had happened before he arrived. Ethan glanced across the dining room where Naomi was helping an elderly couple choose dessert with the same patience she had shown him. Then he answered with a sentence that Daniel would remember long after the meal ended. He said that the easiest way to measure a person's character was not by watching how they treated important people, but by watching how they treated strangers who could offer nothing in return. Daniel followed Ethan's gaze and nodded thoughtfully. Throughout the rest of dinner, both men found themselves observing Naomi from a distance. She greeted every table with the same warmth. She listened without interrupting. She remembered allergies without checking her notebook twice. She thanked the kitchen staff every time they handed her a completed order. She smiled at the dishwasher carrying heavy racks of clean glasses just as sincerely as she smiled at wealthy guests discussing investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. There was no performance in her kindness because it never changed depending on who stood in front of her. Ethan recognized something deeply familiar in that consistency. He had built companies around technology, efficiency, and innovation. Yet he knew every successful organization ultimately depended on people who quietly made everyone around them better. By the time dessert arrived, the conversation at Ethan's table had shifted away from contracts and financial forecasts. Instead, both businessmen found themselves discussing leadership, culture, and the rare individuals whose influence could never be measured on a balance sheet. Neither of them realized that before the night was over, Naomi Carter would become the center of that conversation in a way none of them could have predicted. By the time the last dessert plate was cleared, the atmosphere inside Ashford House had shifted almost imperceptibly. The polished silver still reflected the golden chandeliers. Soft jazz still drifted across the dining room. Wealthy guests still discussed investments, acquisitions, and vacation homes overlooking distant coastlines. Yet for Ethan, the restaurant no longer felt like another elegant stop on an exhausting business trip. It felt unexpectedly personal. As Naomi collected the empty teacups, Ethan thanked her once again in Japanese, this time with a sincerity that could not be mistaken for simple politeness. Naomi smiled and replied that she had only done what any good host should do. Ethan gently shook his head. No, he answered. Many people can serve food. Very few know how to make a stranger feel welcome. Those words lingered in Naomi's mind as she returned to the service station. She had received compliments before. Guests occasionally praised her professionalism or left generous tips. But this felt different. There was no exaggeration, no performance, and no attempt to impress anyone. It was simply gratitude spoken with complete honesty. While the kitchen prepared the final orders of the evening, Daniel found himself thinking about the conversation he had just witnessed. He had spent years negotiating with executives from around the world and understood how easily cultural misunderstandings could create unnecessary distance. Tonight, one waitress had accomplished in minutes what expensive consultants often failed to achieve. She had replaced uncertainty with trust. Daniel quietly asked Ethan why the interaction seemed to matter so much. Ethan looked toward the open kitchen where Naomi was helping another server organize dessert trays before answering. He explained that when people reached a certain level of success, strangers often treated them differently the moment they recognized their name. Every smile became more careful. Every conversation became more calculated. Every gesture seemed designed to gain something in return. Tonight, Ethan said softly, she helped me before she knew who I was. Daniel leaned back in his chair without saying a word. He realized his friend was not talking about language anymore. He was talking about character. Across the dining room, the restaurant manager finally approached Naomi. She quietly wondered whether she had accidentally broken protocol by assisting a table outside her assigned section. Instead, the manager surprised her with a warm expression. Several guests had complimented the way she handled the earlier misunderstanding, and even the kitchen staff had noticed how quickly the entire dining room relaxed afterward. The manager thanked her for protecting the restaurant's reputation through patience rather than panic. Naomi accepted the compliment with her usual humility before returning to work as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She had learned long ago that consistency mattered more than recognition. The evening continued until the final guests began collecting coats and preparing to leave. Outside the towering windows, Manhattan shimmered beneath thousands of lights stretching toward the Hudson River. Yellow taxis flowed through the streets like ribbons of gold, while reflections danced across the rain-polished sidewalks from an earlier afternoon shower. Ethan stood near the entrance beside Daniel, preparing to leave for another morning filled with meetings, presentations, and decisions involving billions of dollars. Yet before stepping outside, he turned back one final time. Naomi happened to be arranging fresh flowers near the reception desk for the following day's lunch service. She looked up as Ethan approached. He bowed respectfully, a gesture so natural that several nearby employees instinctively paused what they were doing. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, not for a business card or a checkbook, but for a small notebook. He carefully wrote down a single sentence before tearing out the page and handing it to Naomi. Curious, she unfolded it after he stepped toward the door. Written in neat handwriting were just a few simple words. Kindness speaks every language. Naomi read the sentence twice before carefully placing the note inside the pocket of her apron. Unaware that this small piece of paper would become the beginning of a journey neither she nor Ethan could possibly imagine. The next morning arrived wrapped in the cool gray light of a Manhattan sunrise. Delivery trucks rolled through quiet streets. Coffee shops welcomed their first customers, and Ashford House slowly awakened for another day of polished service and careful preparation. Naomi arrived 30 minutes early, just as she always did. She tied her apron, greeted the kitchen staff by name, and slipped the folded note from her pocket before placing it inside the small notebook she carried everywhere. She did not collect expensive souvenirs or celebrity photographs. Instead, she collected words that reminded her why kindness still mattered in a world that often moved too quickly to notice it. Before the lunch rush began, she opened the notebook and read the sentence once more. Kindness speaks every language. She smiled softly before closing the cover. Across the city, Ethan sat inside a sleek conference room overlooking the skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Hudson River while executives from 3 countries reviewed quarterly reports displayed across enormous digital screens. Charts climbed upward. Market forecasts filled the room. For most people, discovering the identity of the man they had helped would have become the story they told for years. For Naomi, it became a quiet reminder that every guest deserved the same respect, whether they arrived in a limousine or on foot. She folded Ethan's handwritten note with the same care she reserved for family photographs and placed it inside the back cover of her notebook. Then she returned to work before the lunch crowd even noticed she had stepped away. Days passed, each one following the familiar rhythm of polished tables, warm greetings, and long hours on her feet. Yet something inside Naomi had changed. Not because she expected her life to become easier, but because someone she deeply respected had reminded her that the values she practiced every day actually mattered. Meanwhile, Ethan had returned to Tokyo, where an endless calendar of meetings, factory visits, investor briefings, and international interviews demanded every hour of his schedule. Towering office buildings reflected the morning sun as his motorcade moved through the city, but even surrounded by innovation and achievement, his thoughts occasionally drifted back to one quiet evening in Manhattan. During a leadership meeting with senior executives, the discussion centered on customer experience. Teams presented new software, advanced translation tools, and artificial intelligence systems designed to improve communication around the world. Ethan listened carefully before asking a question that no presentation had answered. How do we teach technology to make people feel respected? The conference room fell silent. Engineers exchanged thoughtful glances. Marketing directors reviewed their notes. Finally, one executive admitted that no software could replace genuine empathy. Ethan smiled gently. Exactly, he replied. Machines can translate words. People translate trust. The conversation shifted immediately. Instead of discussing features alone, the leadership team began exploring the importance of human connection in every interaction their company created. Daniel later joked that one dinner in New York had completely changed the direction of an entire executive meeting. Ethan quietly answered that perhaps it should. Back in Manhattan, the restaurant prepared for its annual hospitality recognition evening, an event where employees were acknowledged not for sales or tips, but for moments of exceptional service. Naomi thought little about it. She believed others deserved the recognition more than she did. She remembered coworkers who covered extra shifts without complaint, cooks who stayed late to perfect every plate, and dishwashers who worked tirelessly behind closed doors without receiving applause from a single guest. When the manager announced that one employee had been nominated by multiple customers for demonstrating extraordinary professionalism and compassion, Naomi applauded with everyone else, expecting another name to be called. Instead, she heard her own. For a heartbeat, she remained completely still. The dining room erupted into warm applause as her coworkers smiled and encouraged her to step forward. The manager explained that several guests from different evenings had independently praised the same qualities: patience, respect, calm under pressure, the ability to make strangers feel welcome. Naomi accepted the small crystal award with humble gratitude, thanking every member of the staff because she believed excellent service had never been the achievement of one person alone. As the applause slowly faded, the restaurant receptionist hurried into the room carrying a sealed international envelope that had just arrived by overnight courier from Japan. The manager looked at the elegant handwriting on the front, then glanced toward Naomi with quiet surprise. Without realizing it, everyone in the room had become part of a story that was only beginning to unfold. The receptionist carefully handed the international envelope to the manager, who turned it over once before offering it to Naomi with an encouraging smile. Every employee in the room watched with quiet curiosity as she gently opened the seal. Inside was a thick cream-colored letter embossed with the elegant logo of Brooks Global Technologies. Tucked behind it was a smaller invitation printed on textured paper. Naomi unfolded the letter first. The opening lines were simple, written in Ethan's unmistakably careful handwriting instead of by an assistant. He thanked her once again for reminding him that genuine hospitality could never be replaced by prestige, wealth, or technology. He explained that after returning to Japan, he had shared her story with his executive leadership team because he believed one evening in a restaurant had demonstrated more about leadership than many corporate seminars ever could. Naomi read each sentence slowly, hardly noticing that the entire staff had fallen silent around her. Ethan continued by explaining that Brooks Global Technologies was preparing to launch an international hospitality and customer experience initiative connecting luxury hotels, restaurants, and technology partners across North America and Asia. The company had invested years designing advanced language translation systems, but after reflecting on their conversation in Manhattan, he realized the greatest challenge had never been translation alone. It had always been helping people feel understood. That was why he wanted to invite Naomi to attend the project's inaugural summit in New York as a special guest. Not as a waitress, not as a publicity story, but as someone whose actions had influenced the direction of an international program. Naomi blinked several times before reading the paragraph again, convinced she must have misunderstood something. The invitation covered all travel expenses, professional attire if needed, and participation in leadership discussions alongside executives, hospitality experts, and educators from around the world. There was no promise of employment, no extravagant reward, and no dramatic offer meant to impress headlines. Instead, there was something Naomi valued far more: respect. The manager quietly asked if everything was all right. Naomi handed him the letter without speaking. As he finished reading, he slowly removed his glasses and smiled with unmistakable pride. Several coworkers gathered nearby, each reacting with genuine excitement as they realized the invitation had been earned through nothing more than the same kindness Naomi showed every day. One server laughed softly and admitted she had always wondered why Naomi spent so much time learning about different cultures after exhausting shifts. Another cook recalled seeing her borrow language books during meal breaks instead of scrolling through her phone. Suddenly, years of quiet dedication made perfect sense. That evening, after the restaurant closed, Naomi walked home beneath the glowing lights of Manhattan, carrying the envelope carefully inside her bag. The cool evening air felt different somehow, not because the city had changed, but because possibility had quietly entered her life without asking permission. When she reached her apartment, she placed the invitation beside the notebook that already held Ethan's handwritten message. Looking at both pieces of paper together, she realized neither one promised instant success. They offered something much rarer, a chance to grow without pretending to be someone else. Thousands of miles away, Ethan stood inside his Tokyo office looking out across the city skyline after another long day of meetings. Daniel entered carrying tomorrow's schedule before noticing a small photograph resting beside Ethan's desk. It showed nothing extraordinary, only the dining room of Ashford House taken during an earlier visit. Daniel smiled knowingly. "Do you think she will accept the invitation?" he asked. Ethan looked toward the photograph before answering with complete confidence. People who choose kindness without expecting recognition usually choose courage when opportunity finally knocks. Neither of them realized that the summit they had planned would soon become the place where Naomi's quiet voice would inspire far more people than either of them could imagine. Naomi accepted the invitation 3 days later, not because it came from one of the most influential companies in the world, but because she believed every opportunity to learn was a gift that deserved respect. The summit was scheduled for the following month at a conference center overlooking the Hudson River, bringing together hospitality leaders, technology innovators, educators, and business executives from more than 20 countries. On the morning of the event, Naomi stood outside the glass entrance for a brief moment, smoothing the sleeves of the simple navy business suit provided by the organizers. It fit perfectly, yet she still felt like the same waitress who had spent years carrying trays through crowded dining rooms. She took one steady breath before walking inside. The lobby buzzed with quiet conversation as guests wearing conference badges greeted one another in English, Japanese, Spanish, French, and several other languages. Large digital displays showcased new communication technologies designed to connect people across cultures. Naomi admired the innovation around her, but what captured her attention most was watching strangers smile after hearing someone greet them in their own language. It reminded her that every breakthrough began with a simple desire to understand another person. A conference coordinator welcomed her warmly and escorted her to the front section of the auditorium. As she entered, several executives glanced toward the newcomer whose name appeared on the program beside distinguished industry leaders. Some expected a university professor. Others assumed she was an experienced consultant. None of them expected the quiet woman who had spent most of her career serving tables in a Manhattan restaurant. Naomi chose her seat without drawing attention to herself, placing her notebook on her lap. Inside were the 2 handwritten messages Ethan had given her over the past month. She carried them not as symbols of success, but as reminders of the values that had brought her there. Moments later, the lights dimmed and the audience settled into silence. Ethan walked onto the stage to sustained applause. His presentation began with impressive innovations, international partnerships, and ambitious plans for the future. Giant screens displayed maps, research, and emerging technologies capable of translating conversations almost instantly. The audience listened with admiration, taking notes as he explained how rapidly communication tools were evolving. Then Ethan paused. He closed the presentation remote and stepped away from the podium. The room grew noticeably quieter. "Today," he said calmly, "I could spend another hour explaining what technology can accomplish. Instead, I would rather tell you what it cannot accomplish alone." Every eye remained fixed on him. Ethan described an evening in New York when one simple act of patience transformed an uncomfortable situation into a meaningful human connection. He never exaggerated the story. He never turned himself into the hero. Instead, he spoke about feeling vulnerable in a place where he expected confidence, and about meeting someone who chose compassion before curiosity. "She did not help me because of my title," he said. "She helped me because I was another human being who needed help." A quiet wave of reflection moved through the audience. Many executives lowered their pens and simply listened. Ethan smiled gently before continuing. "I realized that night our greatest competitive advantage will never be software alone. It will always be people whose character cannot be programmed." He then looked toward the front row. "Naomi Carter, would you please join me?" For a heartbeat, Naomi remained completely still, convinced she had misheard her own name. Hundreds of people turned toward her with welcoming smiles as the applause slowly filled the auditorium. She stood carefully, her heart beating faster than it had in years, and walked toward the stage with the same quiet dignity that had guided her through every shift at Ashford House, unaware that the words she was about to share would leave an impression reaching far beyond the walls of that conference hall. Naomi walked onto the stage beneath the soft glow of the auditorium lights, her footsteps calm even as hundreds of people watched her. She had never spoken before an audience this large. She had never stood beside a global chief executive during an international conference. Yet as she looked across the room, she did not see titles, wealth, or influence. She saw people. People who had families waiting for them at home. People who had once been beginners. People who had probably felt uncertain at least once in their lives. Ethan stepped aside and handed her the microphone with the same quiet respect he had shown from the very beginning. Naomi smiled gently before speaking. "I am not here because I did something extraordinary," she began. "I am here because someone needed help, and I happen to know how to help." The room became perfectly still. Every day, people walk into restaurants, hotels, airports, hospitals, and offices carrying stories we cannot see. Some are celebrating. Some are grieving. Some are simply trying to make it through the day. We never truly know what another person is carrying. That is why kindness should never depend on someone's title, appearance, or bank account. Heads slowly nodded throughout the audience. Naomi continued without rushing, her voice steady and sincere. She spoke about learning Japanese from an elderly neighborhood chef who believed every language carried a different way of expressing respect. She spoke about working long shifts that taught her patience, about listening before speaking, and about discovering that the smallest acts often left the deepest memories. "People sometimes believe service is about delivering food," she said with a warm smile. "I believe service is about helping someone leave happier than when they arrived." The audience answered with genuine applause that seemed to grow stronger with every passing second. Ethan looked toward Naomi with quiet pride, not because she had repeated his ideas, but because she had reminded everyone of a truth that could never be replaced by technology or wealth. When the applause finally settled, Ethan returned to the microphone. "Today," he said, "I would like to announce something that was not included in our original program." A large screen behind them displayed the words Global Hospitality Fellowship Initiative. Ethan explained that Brooks Global Technologies would partner with hospitality organizations across the United States and Japan to provide scholarships, language education, leadership training, and professional development opportunities for employees whose dedication often went unnoticed. He then turned toward Naomi once more. "If she is willing," he said, "I would be honored to ask Naomi Carter to serve as the founding advisor for this initiative, ensuring that every program we create remembers the human values that inspired it." Naomi stood speechless for a brief moment before accepting with humble gratitude. She understood that the invitation was not a reward for one evening. It was an opportunity to help others discover the confidence and dignity they already possessed. Months later, visitors entering Ashford House still found Naomi smiling warmly near the dining room entrance whenever her schedule allowed. Although she now traveled regularly to help train hospitality professionals across the country, she refused to forget where her journey had begun. She often carried the same small notebook in her bag, now holding 3 simple reminders. The first read, "Kindness speaks every language." The second reminded her that true excellence begins with empathy. The third she had written herself after the conference. "Respect is the one language every heart already understands." Ethan occasionally returned to the restaurant whenever business brought him back to Manhattan. He never requested special treatment or private dining rooms. Instead, he enjoyed sitting by the window, ordering dinner with confidence, and thanking every member of the staff before leaving. Some people spend their lives searching for success in boardrooms, headlines, and financial reports. Ethan discovered one of his greatest lessons while trying to order dinner. Naomi discovered that the quiet values she practiced every single day had always been powerful enough to reach the world. Neither of them changed because of money. They changed because one evening, 2 strangers chose respect before assumption, kindness before convenience, and humanity before everything else.